what I am saying is that Kajwang is just a matter of time. I was sounding to caution. You will find that we can allow such a good work by Senator Sige that will help my son and my other friends and their children and everybody. We can help her to kill it without sounding out what I am seeing. So let's see when we go to the committee of the whole, Sige, and you'll not die from it. Consult experts, and I think I can fairly say that I'm an expert in legislation. I've been around for 20 years. So, Mr. Speaker, we want to give life to this. We want to do more. We want to remove the fate of people living with disability from the hands of political leaders. They get an opportunity because political leaders of political parties then give them some form of support. We should tweak the law so that the people living with disability can, for example, elect themselves. Yes, Asige. You can still win an election. You don't have to rely on the national party leader of the Orange Democratic Movement for you to come here. We can say that at this election, people living with disability will vote for themselves. So that the people living with disability who find their way in this house of privilege, the Senate is a house of high privilege. The National Assembly, the county assemblies are positions of high privilege. We cannot leave that in the hands of leaders of political parties. The people living with disability have the capacity to agree amongst themselves on a model of election, or we legislate a model of election that will be used with people living with disability. One of the reasons why I don't like the way we identify affirmative action women who come to the two houses is because of this same problem. Number two, the reason why I don't recognize the affirmative nature of the 47 county women in the National Assembly, it is because the wrong people vote for them. If we wanted women to elect a county MP to represent them, what business do men have in voting in that election? We should have, under this constitution, now that we have got benefit of hindsight, grafted the election laws so that on voting day, we men do not participate in electing the county MP. It be done by women. It is this thing that I want us to push through this so that we don't rush it. Senator Sige, don't forget you are my brother's daughter and I cannot harm your industry. That I want you to achieve more. Not so much because it is good, but also because you have proven that those of us who have been here for 20 years, we have been sleeping on the job. Why didn't we think innovatively the way you have done? With those many remarks, I support.
Senator Kajwang Moses.
Madams, Mr. Speaker, sir. I quickly corrected myself. Mr. Speaker, sir, and my Speaker of choice, I rise to support the County Government's Election Laws Amendment Bill of 2024 that has been sponsored by Senator Crystal Asige. And Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very important amendment, and I hope that this House and the other House will see it fit to pass this because it seeks to clear some inconsistencies in law that have caused problems in the past. Mr. Speaker, Senator Sige has demonstrated exemplary industry, knowledge of legislative affairs, rare intellect, and Mr. Speaker, she has become an idol and of many people and a model of what a legislator should do through her diligence. And Mr. Speaker, we have even considered co-sponsoring the public participation bill together, but we have been delayed by the passage of the sessional paper on public participation. As you have seen, Mr. Speaker, almost every other process in this country has been held hostage by concerns of public participation. And I do hope that we'll be able to put our thoughts together because Senator Sige wanted to inject the disability aspect as far as public participation is concerned. Mr. Speaker, this amendment bill seeks to give effect to Article 177(1)(c) of the Constitution of Kenya. Article 177(1)(c) says that a county assembly shall consist of the number of members of marginalized groups, including persons with disabilities and the youth, prescribed by an Act of Parliament. The Act of Parliament that has made that prescription is not one, but two. The Elections Act, under Section 36(1)(f) and 36(8), has defined the number of members of county assembly to represent marginalized groups as 4. And the County Governments Act under Section 7(1)(a) has defined the number to be 6. And Mr. Speaker, the IEBC has decided to take the provisions of the Elections Act, and the IEBC has been implementing the 4 seats per county assembly rather than the 6 seats that has been prescribed under the County Governments Act. And when the County Governments Act was enacted, Mr. Speaker, it was hoped that this would be the Bible on matters to do with devolution. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage the Devolution Committee, which has been doing a review of the County Governments Act, that it is time for a comprehensive assessment and review of that act, because we have seen a lot of scenarios that are avoidable but cannot be resolved because of the County Governments Act. There are small things, Mr. Speaker, like relationships between governors and their deputies. There are small things around county assemblies and the kind of powers they have, things like procedures for impeachment, small things like those. Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage that this House goes for the upper threshold when it comes to representation of marginalized group and not the lower threshold as has been picked by the IEBC. Senator Ledama, while speaking to this matter, was wondering whether certain forms of inability are considered to be disability. Mr. Speaker, this is such a sensitive matter that it cannot be left to personal interpretation. And that is why the Ministry of Health in 2022 came up with the Disability Medical Assessment and Categorization Guidelines. And they are very, very clear on the types of disability that are recognized. They talk about physical impairment, vision impairment, hearing and speech impairment, mental health disorders, chronic progressive disorders, maxillofacial disabilities. They are all there, Mr. Speaker. And I was asking my sister, Senator Beatrice Ogola, because we have a mutual friend who used to be her member of county assembly, and he's got a stuttering condition. And Mr. Speaker, in those guidelines, even stuttering is defined as speech impairment. So someone who stammers then is qualified for nomination as a representative of persons with disability. We looked at another example, Mr. Speaker, of a gentleman who was very famous where he come from, and he had a very mischievous name called Otieno Omande. Otieno Omande, Mr. Speaker, was proposed for nomination in the inaugural county assembly of Homa Bay. Otieno Omande's disability was a hunchback. And
Senator Beatrice, what is your point of order?
I happen to know the gentleman being mentioned by my Senator Moses Kajwang, but I only thought it wise that Senator Kajwang goes ahead to explain to the House what the meaning of this second name is. It would be fair that he explains that to the House.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Beatrice has chosen not to divulge very important information, that this particular gentleman is her in-law, is her brother-in-law. And so in my culture, a brother-in-law, you might have a very personal relationship. So I think she's conflicted. There's conflict of interest in that question. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the second name, Omande, if I was to describe it, I will fall into the trap of unparliamentary language. And so I am safer calling it in the Luo language. But Mr. Speaker, Otieno Mande was a very famous gentleman, a very famous Gor Mahia supporter. He was not of great height. He was of fairly short stature, and he had a hunchback. And Mr. Speaker, when Otieno Mande was proposed to be a member of the County Assembly to represent persons with disability, people went to court, and they decided, or they moved the court to declare that a hunchback was not a disability within the definition of the law. And Mr. Otieno Mande was struck off the list of potential members of County Assembly, and somebody else was put in his place. When Mr. Otieno Mande died not too long ago, many of us regretted because we thought that he would have represented the interests of persons with disability. But that was then, before the 2022 Disability Medical Assessment and Categorization Guidelines had been put forth. Mr. Speaker, we are all potential persons with disability, because even if you are born with both legs, you never know. With Nairobi City County having gone on autopilot, you never know when you'll drop into a manhole in this city. You never know when you'll be knocked down by a motorbike. If you look at many of our hospitals, especially county hospitals, there's great pressure on those hospitals arising from accidents occasioned and caused by what we call boda riders. One day, someone is of good health and has all their faculties running. The next day, someone suffers physical impairment over situations that we have failed to manage. And Mr. Speaker, this issue of bodas and the accidents they cause and the inevitability of disability that many people face in this city and across many towns, it is a result of our low standards as a society. It is a result of mediocre thinking and planning on the part of leadership and the technocrats and the bureaucrats who are supposed to ensure that there is public safety in this republic. There are countries and capitals like Abidjan in Ivory Coast, Mr. Speaker. In Abidjan, you don't get motorbikes zooming and flying around in a dangerous manner. Mr. Speaker, Windhoek in Namibia, I was fortunate to be there for a climate conversation last week, Mr. Speaker. You don't find those dangerous contraptions. In our case, we have chosen to educate our sons and daughters and later on condemn them to a life riding on motorcycles and calling that true employment. And in the process, endangering the lives and the ability of many of us. And that is why I'm saying that all of us in this house must stand up to be ambassadors and spokespersons for inclusion of persons with disability, because nobody knows what is going to happen tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, a census was carried out on disability in Kenya, and the findings are quite interesting. That out of our total population, 2.2% of the population suffer from one form of disability or another. The county that had the highest figures on disability was Embu at 4.4%, followed by my county, Homa Bay, at 4.3%, followed by Makueni at 4.1%, followed by Siaya and Kisumu in that order. Mr. Speaker, sometimes when you look at these statistics of disability, there is Mr. Speaker, when you look at these statistics on disability, there is a direct proportion to the rate of neglect and marginalization of some of these counties. You can see counties like Homa Bay, Siaya, Kisumu are in the leaders bracket. And then you find that perhaps even some of the counties with the highest instances or incidences of disability in Kenya also suffer a greater burden when it comes to other communicable and non-communicable diseases. That tells you that there's been neglect as a result of progressive or regressive policies of past governments that have led to greater instances of disability in those areas. And Mr. Speaker, one of the main causes of disability in the past used to be polio, but because of modern medication, the polio vaccine is now available, but again, due to lopsided government policies, where certain areas are left out, you still find that in some of these counties that I've mentioned, of Homa Bay, Makueni, Siaya, and Kisumu, there's still a higher instance of polio infection. Mr. Speaker, the formula that has been proposed by Senator Asige requires that at least 5% of members of a county assembly are persons with disabilities. I support and I agree with that figure, because in Homa Bay, the disability prevalence is 4.3%. But, Mr. Speaker, we must also ask ourselves that what then is the best ratio to impose in law? If the national disability incidence rate is at 2.2% of the population, is it fair to insist on a 5% representation of persons with disability in the county assembly? Or it would be reasonable to benchmark it with the national rate?
Senator Kajwang, do you want to be informed by Senator Asige?
I'll be glad to be informed.
Senator Asige?
Thank you so much. And I would never want to interrupt a fantastic flow of thought by the Senator for Homa Bay. The only information I want to put forward for himself as well as the rest of the members is this 5% wasn't a number that I came to on my own or in consultation with stakeholders, which is the county assemblies. Speaker, this 5% comes directly from the Constitution in Article 54, which says that every elective and appointive position in the country should be given to persons with disabilities at 5%. The rate of 5%. That is in Article 54 of the Constitution. And that is where I got the inspiration to add in this amendment, Speaker. So as Senator Kajwang continues his wonderful contribution, I just wanted him to be informed of that provision. I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with Senator Asige that the Constitution under Article 54(2) says that the state shall ensure the progressive implementation of the principle that at least 5% of the members of the public in elective and appointive bodies are persons with disabilities. At least 5%. But you've got a 2.2% disability prevalence in the country. So there is what the Constitution aspires to, and there is the reality. Now, the problem then would be for you to fully realize or actualize Article 54(2), then you'll probably be having the same persons with disability sitting in various elective positions so that the number can get to 5%. Because you've got a 2.2% incidence, but the Constitution requires a 5% representation. I am well guided, Mr. Speaker. I think that it is a debate that we can have, whether it is something that has to be realized immediately or it's something that can be realized progressively. Mr. Speaker, I will conclude my contribution by encouraging Senator Asige to reach out to the other house and to ensure that she finds a co-sponsor for this bill so that it can move fast. And I do note, Mr. Speaker, that the requirement for representation of persons with disability in the National Assembly is contained, it's a constitutional provision, and so we should find friends in the other house who can fast-track this. Mr. Speaker, this is one of those bills that we don't really need to talk to too much. Even when you talk to it, we are just talking to the spirit of it, so that we can encourage Senator Asige and commend her for the excellent work that she's doing. And at the end of the day, she's one of those senators who is doing that which brought her to this house, to represent the interest of marginalized groups, persons with disability, but she has gone beyond it. And Mr. Speaker, she has represented the youth very well, even though I'm not very sure whether she's still youth. Mr. Speaker, I support.
Senator Cherargei.